morning, church. Welcome to First Unitarian Church in New Bedford. I'm Reverend Karen LeBlanc, and I minister to this church as we minister to each other here. We are a beloved community of people who believe that everyone is worthy of respect, that science is real, the democratic process is a sacred thing, that we are all part of an interconnected web and made sacred for it, and that the light and energy that we share and put out makes a difference in this world. We are people of purpose here at First Unitarian, and love is the doctrine of this church, my friends. First Unitarian in New Bedford recognizes that the land we inhabit and enjoy sits on the unceded ancestral land of the Pecasset Wampanoag, the people of the first light. We actively commit ourselves to the process of working to dismantle the legacy of colonialism and oppression of our country's native people and all who have been marginalized. Well, I speak to you this morning from our empty sanctuary. Our church is closed today because of the annual half marathon that begins and ends in our neighborhood and goes around the south end of our city all morning. So we send our love and light out to all the runners and their families and all those who are out cheering in support of those tenacious souls. It's awesome that our beautiful city hosts this great event, but it sure makes it very hard to get to church when it's right in the middle of it. So, but we have the technology, right? So we can do it this way for this week. And since I have you here on YouTube, hey, take the time to subscribe and like this video and maybe share it with someone who you know would appreciate this or one of our other services. Or just do it for yourself so you can easily access some of our other content and listen again to one of Randy's great pieces of music, or hear a poem or a prayer again, or focus in on a sermon for reflection. I am so happy to be here today, even though it's giving me some mild flashbacks from the pandemic. But I do have faith that I will see all these faces that I love back in these pews next week. All the readings this morning are from Pauli Murray, from their book Dark Testament and Other Poems, published in 1970 and recently re-released. I'll be talking a lot about Pauli Murray later on and tell the story of their accomplishments and challenges, but I won't be talking about Pauli's poetry because that's a sermon in itself for me. I will let Pauli's poetry speak for itself, and I think it gives you a real inkling of their interior self, their rage, their brilliance, and their hope. So I'm honored to share these poems with you today, as much as I am honored to share Pauli Murray's story. So go get your coffee and tea, get ready, sit in a comfortable place, and come on and join me on this journey. Let's take a few cleansing breaths and center ourselves. I'm going to light our chalice. Don't know if you'll be able to see that from here, but I hope so. Chalice lighting words from the poem Color Trouble. Few dislike me just because my face has more sun than yours. Then when you see me, turn and run, but do not try to bar the sun. Pauli Murray. The opening words are a poem called Words. We are spendthrifts with words. We squander them, toss them like pennies in the air. Arrogant words, angry words, cruel words, comradely words, shy words tiptoeing from mouth to ear. But the slowly wrought words of love and the thunderous words of heartbreak, those we hoard. Indeed, we do. Now, I was going to play some hymns on my ukulele, but I'll tell you, people, my arthritis is just not allowing me to do that today, and it's a little hinky here by myself to begin with, so go ahead and sing a hymn in your mind and your spirit, and we're going to skip over the hymns for today, sorry. But I will read our covenant together, or I will recite our covenant. What I will do, we come together as a religious community, upholding freedom of conscience, right relationship, and the inherent worth of all people. We value our diversity and pledge to care for one another in the spirit of compassion, to speak and listen to each other with respect, and to promote justice and kindness in the world. You see, it's always back there in my head. It just took me a second to get it out, because it's actually Friday, it's not Sunday. I'm recording this in advance. Our first reading this morning is from Dark Testament. So Dark Testament is a long poem in 12 parts, and I am going to read part 10 right now. The drivers are dead now, but the drivers have sons. The slaves are dead too, but the slaves have sons. And when the sons of drivers meet the sons of slaves, the old hate keeps grinding on. Traitors still double talk, though they've swapped the selling block for ghetto and gun. This is our portion. This is our testament. This is America, dual-brained creature, one hand thrusting us out to the stars, one hand shoving us down in the gutter. Pile up the recordings, sing of pioneers, point to images chipped from mountain heart, swagger through history with glib-tongued traditions. Say of your grassroots, we are a hard-ribbed people, one nation indivisible with liberty and justice for all. Put it all down in a time capsule. Bury it deep in the soil of Virginia. Bury slave song with the Constitution. Bury it in that vineyard of planters and poll taxers, sharecroppers, and presidents. In coffin and outhouse, all men are created equal, and the same red earth is fed by the white bones of Thomas Jefferson and the white bones of Nat Turner. Our prayer this morning, if we can enter into that spirit right now. The prayer this morning, page 49, this is called the Newer Cry. I am weary, O God, of dark lamentations, of angry voices and sullen faces, of empty hands stretched heavenward, pleading for mercy and justice. We are not dumb, driven beasts. We are men. Our hands have been taught to work and fight. We have known bondage. We have known hunger and need. We have known pain and humiliation. But man is a slave only to himself, and pain is but the door to deeper understanding. Let us laugh, not in deceit, not in childish pleasure, but out of gladness, joy in our youth, pride in our strength. Let us view all men with calm, untroubled eyes, but never grow smug in our own self-righteousness. Let us give pity where pity is due, but scorn it from our inferiors. Let us grow strong, but never in our strength forget the weaker brother. Let us fight, but only when we must fight. Let us work, for therein lies our salvation. Let us conquer the soil, for therein lies our sustenance. Let us conquer the soul, for therein lies our power. Let us march in steady, unbroken beat, for therein lies our progress. Let us never cease to laugh, to live, to love, and to grow. New York, 1933. The second message, we're back to Dark Testament. This is part 11. Tear it out of the history books. Bury it in conspiracies of silence. Fight many wars to suppress it. But it is written in our faces 20 million times over. It sings in our blood. It cries from the housetops. It mourns the wind in forests, when dogs howl and will not be comforted, when newborn lambs bleat in the snowdrifts and dead leaves rattle in the graveyards. And we'll shout it from the mountains, we'll tell it in the valleys, we'll talk it in the miner's shack, we will sing it at the workbench, we'll whisper it over back fences, we'll speak it in the kitchen. We'll state it at the White House. We'll tell it everywhere to all who will listen. We will lay siege. Let thunder serve our claim, for it must be told, endlessly told, and you must hear it. Listen, white brothers, hear the dirge of history, and hold out your hand. Hold out your hand. God bless Pauli Murray. So, let's get on to the sermon part. This is going to be a shorter service today, in case you didn't notice. I called this Confrontation by Typewriter, and I'm sure you'll understand why. So one of the things we like to do here on Sundays in this church is to explore the life stories of interesting and inspiring people. And I've been saving this one for a little bit now. So I want to talk to you today about Pauli Murray, who was an early civil rights activist, advocate, legal scholar, and theorist, teacher, poet, author, and later in life, an Episcopal priest. Elizabeth Alexander, who wrote the foreword to the latest edition of Dark Testament, said, "Murray lived a life fueled by duty, mission, justice, rescue, learning, sharing knowledge, fighting the power." So before I even begin to tell you about Pauli Murray, we need to have a discussion about pronouns. A lot of what I'm talking about today comes from the website of the Pauli Murray Center for History, and social justice located in Pauli's childhood home of Durham, North Carolina. This is what they have to say about how they use pronouns in their content. When the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray lived, language about LGBTQ plus communities, gender expression, and gender was different than it is today. We don't know how Pauli Murray would identify if they were living today, or which pronouns Murray would use for self-expression. Murray self-described as a he-she personality in correspondence with family members. For years, Murray requested and was denied testosterone injections and hormone therapy, as well as exploratory surgery to investigate their reproductive organs, believing they may have been intersex. Later, in journals, essays, letters, and autobiographical works, Murray employed she, her, hers pronouns and self-described as a woman. During the 20th century, being openly queer in the United States was illegal and dangerous. In efforts to survive and maintain employment and housing, many queer, transgender, and gender nonconforming people were forced to repress or conceal their identities. Respectability politics, widespread homophobia and transphobia, and federal and state policies likely constrained Pauli Murray to publicly and thoroughly explore their gender. As Naomi Simmons Thorne writes, given the rigid enforcement of the gender binary, we do not, nor will we ever know, Murray's true gender identity. That is, after all, for themselves to say, right? So the Pauli Murray Center did something sort of revolutionary, if not just a little confusing when you're reading it, when it comes to the use of pronouns regarding Reverend Dr. Murray. They say, this is an ongoing discussion among the Pauli Murray Center. Currently, the Pauli Murray Center chooses to use he, him, and they, them pronouns when discussing Pauli Murray's early life, and she, her, hers when discussing Dr. Murray's later years. When discussing Murray in general, we interchangeably use she, her, hers, he, him, his, they, them, theirs pronouns, or we refer to Pauli Murray by their name and titles. We hope this strategy will encourage readers to embrace the individual and fluid nature of gender. So they're really opening up an interesting way of referring to Pauli Murray when it comes to the very fluid nature of Pauli Murray's assumed gender expression. And as I was getting used to that when I was reading about Pauli Murray, I was thinking about how it's kind of honest and an informative reflection of what Pauli Murray was struggling with throughout their life. Since we don't know for sure how Pauli Murray identified and when and why, and for my own ease of telling this story and your ease of hearing it, I am going to stick to they, them pronouns or Pauli Murray's name. Aside from the Pauli Murray Center, I got a lot of the information I'm talking about today from the documentary I Am Pauli Murray and from an episode of Democracy Now! From 3 years ago, which is where I first learned about Pauli Murray. Now let's get to the story. And it's one that is really overdue to be told. If they aren't in the history books, they will be eventually, because Pauli Murray was a person of astounding accomplishment, a warrior for civil rights, and one of the most pivotal figures in the recognition of gender equality in the 20th century. Pauli Murray was born Anna Pauline Murray in Baltimore, Maryland on November 20th, 1910, the fourth of 6 children to nurse Agnes Fitzgerald, and educator William Murray. Agnes Fitzgerald Murray died of a cerebral hemorrhage in 1914, and William suffered from depression exacerbated by the long-term effects of typhoid fever and was eventually confined to Crownsville State Hospital, where he was later murdered by a white guard in 1923. After Agnes's death, Murray was sent to live with their aunt, Pauline Fitzgerald Dame, and their grandparents, Robert George and Cornelia Smith Fitzgerald, in Durham, North Carolina. Pauli Murray graduated from Hillside High School in 1926 with a Certificate of Distinction, and then moved to New York City, where they attended Hunter College, graduating in 1933 with a degree in English literature. Soon after, they had their name changed to Pauli. After graduation, they worked for the WPA as a teacher for the Remedial Reading Project in New York City and began publishing various articles and poetry. While traveling in New York, they dressed as a boy to make it safer for them to ride the trains and hitch rides in cars. Pauli Murray became quickly involved in the civil rights movement, a real progenitor of what was to come. In 1938, they began a media and letter writing campaign to enter graduate school at the all-white University of North Carolina. Despite a lack of support from the NAACP, Murray's campaign received national publicity. During this campaign, Murray developed a lifelong friendship and correspondence with the First Lady of the United States at the time, Eleanor Roosevelt, and she called Pauli's campaign Confrontation by Typewriter. In 1940, 15 years before Rosa Parks made a name for herself, Pauli Murray was arrested and imprisoned for refusing to sit at the back of a bus in Virginia. In 1941, Murray enrolled at the law school at Howard University with the intention of becoming a civil rights lawyer. The following year, they joined George Hauser, James Farmer, and Bayard Rustin to form the nonviolence-focused Congress of Racial Equality. While at Howard, Pauli became acutely aware of the oppression they faced as a Black person who was also perceived to be a woman, the singular female, in their law class for the first 2 years. This is how she came up with the term Jane Crow. She wrote a paper, and she called it Jane Crow and the Law. That paper argued against Plessy versus Ferguson, which had essentially established the constitutionality of segregation. She wrote, "Not only is the doctrine of separate but equal facilitating a delusion, but its effect is to do violence to the personality of the individual affected." Plessy versus Ferguson, I'm glad to say, was eventually overturned in 1954. In 1944, Pauli Murray graduated top of the class at Howard, and as valedictorian, they were awarded the Rosenwald Fellowship, which most previous graduates used to attend Harvard. Despite winning the fellowship, Murray was rejected from Harvard because she was female, even though a letter of support for them was written to the university by FDR himself. Can you imagine? The president wrote a letter to try to get Pauli Murray into Harvard, and they weren't having it. After the rejection, Pauli wrote to Harvard, "I would gladly change my sex to meet your requirements, but since the way to such change has not yet been revealed to me, I have no recourse but to appeal to you to change your minds. Harvard was not about to change their minds. Instead, Pauli went to the University of California Bolt School of Law, where they received their LLM, Master's of Laws degree. And during all these challenges, Pauli was also seriously struggling with feeling as though they were a man. And yet we had really yet to develop the vocabulary to describe these kinds of feelings. One of her true lifelines was her Aunt Pauline, who supported their non-binary existence. Pauli called themselves one of nature's experiments, a girl who should have been a boy, and said, "My life is somewhat unbearable at this point. In a letter to their aunt in 1943, Murray says, "I don't know whether I'm right or whether society or some medical authority is right. I only know how I feel and what makes me happy. This conflict rises up to knock me down at every apex I reach in my career. And because the laws of society do not protect me, I am exposed to any enemy or person who may or may not want to hurt me." Pauli was even institutionalized on a few occasions during the 30s and 40s as they struggled with their gender identity. And we can really feel that pain that they were suffering in her poetry. The weight of it must have been absolutely crushing sometimes. After law school, Murray returned to New York City and provided support to the now growing civil rights movement. Pauli Murray's book, States' Laws on Race and Color, was published in 1951, thanks to the United Methodist Women, who commissioned this work as a service to the movement and part of their charters for racial justice. Thurgood Marshall, head of the legal department at the NAACP, described the book as the Bible for civil rights litigators. In the early 50s, Murray, like many black citizens involved in the civil rights movement, came up against the perils of McCarthyism. In 1952, Pauli Murray lost a U.S. State Department post at Cornell University because the people who supplied her their references, the likes of Eleanor Roosevelt, Thurgood Marshall, and A. Philip Randolph, were considered too radical. What do you think about that? Pauli Murray was told in a letter that Cornell had decided to give 100% protection to the university, quote, "in view of the troublous times in which we live." In other words, Cornell would rather keep the status quo than fight for equity for all of their students. That was a popular tune of the day. In 1956, she published Proud Shoes, the story of an American family, and it was a poignant portrayal of Pauli's hometown of Durham, North Carolina, and a biography of how white supremacy and anti-blackness oppressed their grandparents. Shortly after the book release, Murray was offered a job at a new law firm, and while working there, met their lifetime partner, Irene "Reenie" Barlow, who was the office manager of that law firm. In 1960, Murray traveled to Ghana to explore their African cultural roots and teach law. While there, they co-authored a book, The Constitution and Government of Ghana, with Leslie Rubin. Upon returning, Pauli enrolled at Yale Law School, where they studied for their Juris Doctor degree and mentored several young women activists who, of course, also became well known. In 1962, John F. Kennedy asked Eleanor Roosevelt to be the head of his Presidential Commission on the Status of Women. And Mrs. Roosevelt knew just who to call to help with such a big project. Kennedy appointed Pauli Murray to the Committee on Civil and Political Rights. Murray worked closely with A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, and Martin Luther King, but was critical of the way that men dominated the leadership of these civil rights organizations. In August 1963, Murray wrote to Randolph and asserted that they had been, quote, increasingly perturbed over the blatant disparity between the major role which Negro women have played and are playing in the crucial grassroots levels of our struggle and the minor role of leadership they have been assigned in the national policy-making decisions, unquote. After that, Pauli Murray joined Betty Friedan and others to found the National Organization for Women in 1966, but later moved away from a leadership role there because they did not believe that now appropriately addressed the issues of Black and working class women. It never ceases to amaze me and infuriate me that so many people who were fighting for the rights and freedoms of their own groups had such a hard time letting Black women lead, even Black men. When we talk about suffragettes and women finally getting the vote, you all hear about Susan B. Anthony, but she made Black women like the great Ida B. Wells march at the back of their parades, if she let them march at all, because she thought that including them would be detrimental to women actually getting the vote. I can only imagine how Pauli Murray felt being a brilliant Black, non-binary, female-presenting lawyer at such a challenging time in our history. The turmoil she faced and overcame inside and out was daunting, to say the very least, and it's part of why I hold Pauli Murray in such high regard. Pauli Murray later pushed hard on the ACLU to represent gender equality as much as race equality, and that was a radical idea at the time. From 1968 to 73, Dr. Pauli Murray served as a faculty member at Brandeis University, teaching an early American studies program where they had to fight once again to get tenure, and this time they did. In 1973, their longtime partner, Irene Barlow, passed away, and it hit Pauli very hard. They wrote, quote, "To those of you who loved Irene Barlow, forgive me if I was harsh following the sadness of her passing. You had lost a friend. I had lost a silent partner. I was raging in my agony, arguing with God. Renee's death changed my life. I felt an urgency to complete my mission on earth in the days left to me." Apparently, God won that argument because Murray left their tenured position at Brandeis to become a candidate for ordination at General Theological Seminary. In 1977, Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray became the first Black person perceived as a woman in the U.S. to become an Episcopal priest. Pauli said of becoming a priest, they said it turned them from a talker to a listener. And for the rest of their life, for their whole life, they embraced the ministry of justice and equity wholeheartedly. The great Pauli Murray died of cancer in Pittsburgh on July 1st, 1985, at 74 years old. In 2017, Yale named a residential college in her honor, Pauli Murray College. It was the first Yale college named after a person of color and the first named after a person recognized as someone from the LGBTQIA+ community. In 2022, building on Murray's legal work, the ACLU won a Supreme Court case prohibiting the discrimination against LGBTQIA+ persons, which would have been impossible to conceptualize without Pauli Murray's contributions. She was a brilliant legal theorist. Pauli Murray was an incredible example of lifelong tenacity, overcoming so many challenges to get where they were. I don't think we can teach 20th century American history without teaching about Pauli Murray. So great were their accomplishments, so difficult their challenges, and so broad their influence. If you have Netflix, I highly recommend watching I Am Pauli Murray. It is streaming now at Netflix. And if you don't have Netflix, we'd like to set up a watch party here at church. So tell me if you're up for that, and we'll make it happen. Go read Pauli Murray's poetry, Dark Testament, and other works. She has a plethora of books to read. I really suggest you get to know them that way. I hope you take the time to process Pauli Murray's story and go out into the world and tell it. Spread the word about this incredible person. Say their name. Tell their story. So glad I could tell you this story this morning. It's quite, the whole thing is just amazing to me. And I can't believe that Pauli Murray's name is not on every person's lips who fights for equality, equity, justice, anti-racism, gender care. Oh my gosh. They're one of my heroes. That's all I can tell you. So I'm going to finish with one final poem. It's called Aloofness. My separate self must range from star to star, find its moorings in the ocean's depth, and feel no touch more binding than fingers of wind lifting a hair. Yet, were you not there to greet me, I would not venture past this narrow sill. Hold fast, my church. We love you. Stay strong. Live long and prosper. Go in peace. We'll see you next week. We've got the social justice service. We are going to have the speaker from the Women's Center for Women's History Month. We hope you'll join us here at First Unitarian in New Bedford then. Take care.